Hey, I'm Susan Palmer of Lead Cat Press. Welcome to my studio update. Thanks so much for tuning in. It has been a minute, right? So about 2 weeks ago, I moved my studio back to Seattle, and I'm still teaching online classes, lessons. I have some later lesson times now that I'm on West Coast time. So message me about that if you're interested. And yeah, I'm just enjoying the weather. I love it. And the donuts and the coffee and the musicians and all of the stuff. So I'm kind of sinking in here and my molecules are all realigning. So as always with these studio updates, you can scroll down to the description and just go to the section that most interests you or something that we covered in our lesson this week that you want a refresher on. And what we're doing this week for the technique, I'm covering thirds. For the reading, I'm going to give you an exercise to use that will help you really internalize triplets. For the chords, I have a little chord warm-up that might be helpful for you. For the scales and soloing stuff, I'm kind of getting into a little bit of music theory with some chord tones and how to use chord tones over the blues, so some thoughts on that. For the theory, there's a heated debate. There's always been a heated debate about the minor 7 flat 5 chords versus half diminished, so I weigh in on that one for curious minds. For the tunes, I'm going to share just a bunch of little kind of rock riffs that I think are really important that I've got some students working on right now. And my pro tip for you, well, it's just a quick little thought. So thanks again for tuning in, and it's so great to be back in Seattle. If you're in the area, I hope to meet up with you at some point here. One of my students' moms was a piano teacher when he was growing up, and at our first lesson, he came to me and started playing this exercise that he thought he remembered from listening to his mom teach piano lessons. And the exercise goes like this. And I really liked that he played that exercise for me because he was really using his ear. He said that he didn't really know much about guitar. He just found those notes after learning that scale pattern. It's just something that came naturally to him. So I want to encourage you to think of these type of melodies. I know I've done a lot of these warm-up exercises for the technique section in these videos. So check them out and see how many of these you can put together. But this is a really good one to start with. It's just thirds, ascending and descending, using that 6-string root G major scale pattern. Kind of a test I use for students to see how well they are internalizing triplets is to have them play a measure of eighth notes followed by a measure of eighth note triplets. And this works really well if you're thinking of just that 1, 2, 3, 4 exercise. And so I want to demonstrate this because in the reading studies that are in the Guitar Lesson Companion Volume 1, triplets are a part of that. So this is, again, something to help you internalize this. So I'm going to start with a measure of just eighth notes, playing 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm going to go to eighth note triplets on the next string, and I'm just going to alternate. So practice with me and then try this on your own. My metronome here is at 72 beats per minute. So along with having a good single string warm-up technique exercise that you do each time you play, it's also helpful to have some kind of chord technique study that you do. And I have a student who's going to be going to some jam sessions and just needed a kind of a gentle chord warm-up to get their fingers in the game so that when it came time to play the tune, they were already warmed up for those chords. And I came up with this idea. It's very simple. I'm just harmonizing a C major scale using seventh chords. So we start with C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7, G7, and then back down, same thing. And it just gets you acclimated to the guitar, moving up the neck with the smaller frets up here, the different chord shapes. Now you can also do this with the root note on the 6th string, and in this case I'm going to do this in the key of G major. So I have G major 7, A minor 7, B minor 7, C major 7, D 7, and then back down, same thing. And if you have a little time when you're practicing on your own, you may want to put the metronome on. And I'm going to interpret this on beats 2 and 4 and just kind of get a little groove going. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. There you go. Alright, so I just played a 12-bar blues in the key of C, and I soloed using kind of a cool little theory concept here, which is the idea of chord tones. And I love teaching students chord tones. I have a whole book on that. It's volume 2 of the Guitar Lesson Companion. And in this example, I'm just taking a couple of the really important notes from that blues, which are the 3rd and the 7th of each one of those chords. So over that C chord, the really important notes to play are going to be B flat and E. And the thirds are almost always a great place to start, no matter what kind of tune that you're playing. And that flat 7 in there, that B flat, is, you know, kind of a really, I don't know, kind of a grungy chord that, or note there, that I think is really fun to play too. Really kind of, it evokes the blues feeling a lot. So over the C7, I was really highlighting the note E, and then I played the note B flat. Those were two notes that I really kind of centered my progression on. Now, what's really cool about this C chord is that when we go to the 4 chord, which is the F7 chord, both the 3 and the 7 fall down a half step. So the B flat becomes A, which is the 3rd of the F7 chord, and the E half steps down and becomes E flat, which is the flat 7 in that F7 chord. And that's why you can get away with playing a 12-bar blues just with the 3rds and the 7ths. You can hear that chord change just like that. You don't have to have any other notes on there, especially if you have a bass playing. So when you're soloing, it's really helpful to use those notes, especially right at the edges of the bar, where right before the chord changes. So I think on that first line, I highlighted that E, and then when we went to that F7 chord, I went directly to that E flat. That would not have been so prominent if I had played, an E and then maybe a C, and then I hit that E flat over the F7 chord. It works really well when we just utilize those half steps. It's a small movement that has dramatic results. And the same thing happens when I went from that B flat over the C7 chord to the A and that F7 chord. And the other thing I try to stress at this point is that, I teach most of my students the minor pentatonic scale, in one of our first lessons, just because there's a lot that you can do with that scale. But it's just a pool of notes that evokes a specific sound or flavor. The chord tones are just going to be so much more specific to each one of those chords. But it's not enough just to play those chord tones. You really have to look for the transitions from one chord to the next and how you're going to map out those chord tones from one chord to the next. So half steps are really great, just thinking of the path of least resistance between each chord. So go ahead and analyze that solo, see if you can figure out what I did over the G7 chord, hint, chord tones, and see if you can play along with that. All right, do you call it a minor 7 flat 5 or a half diminished chord? I had a professor in college who was my English professor who would not correct our grammar on any of the papers that we turned in. And I thought that was weird. He was an English professor. And, he said that as long as he could understand the point that we were communicating, he saw no need to correct our grammar. And okay, so that's why I speak the way that I speak. Anyways, I see that that could be helpful to transfer into some of the music community discussions that I see and participate in. And there's, some people who want to call a minor 7 flat 5 chord a half diminished. And I think when you're looking at a piece of sheet music, if you see that tiny circle with the slash mark through it, followed by the number 7, to me, that's just a quick way to write and to see a minor 7 flat 5 chord. I don't call it a diminished, a half diminished chord because it doesn't function at all like a diminished chord. The formula is slightly related to that of a diminished chord, but the function of it is not a diminished chord. So I think of it as a minor 7 flat 5 chord, but again, I do prefer that shorthand way of notating it in apps or on paper and in sheet music of that tiny circle with the slash market through it, followed by the number 7. So minor 7 flat 5, half diminished 7. As long as you play the chord and it sounds and functions like you need it to function for that piece, I think we're good. My pro tip for you this week is just really a thought. Very simple, short thought. There's so much information and not enough practicing.